During World War II, the United States pulled off one of the most incredible, most audacious projects in all of human history, building the atomic bomb. But to do that, they first had to build something almost as unbelievable, entire cities hidden in plain sight, that on paper simply did not exist. Okay, let's dive into this wild story. I mean, seriously, think about that for a second. How do you hide a city of 75,000 people? It sounds like a riddle, right? But for the US government, it was a very real logistical nightmare they had to solve on the fly. And this question gets right to the heart of the Manhattan Project, pulling off something on a scale never seen before, all under a blanket of absolute total secrecy.
So, what kicked this whole thing off? What set this monumental effort in motion? Well, it all started with a single scientific discovery, a discovery that had the terrifying potential to change the world forever. And things moved fast, really fast. In 1938, the discovery of nuclear fission happens in Nazi Germany, and that, understandably, sparks immediate panic among scientists in the Allied nations. Einstein himself co-signs a letter to President Roosevelt warning him. But it's the attack on Pearl Harbor in '41 that just lights the fuse. Suddenly, this isn't a theoretical science project anymore, it's an urgent military mission, and it's handed over to General Leslie Groves. For General Groves, secrecy was everything, and his number one tool was a strategy called compartmentalization. The idea was simple, but its effect was profound. You basically keep every single person, every scientist, every engineer, every secretary, in their own little information bubble. Now, you can imagine the tension this created, right? You've got a military culture demanding total secrecy, clashing with a scientific culture that absolutely thrives on collaboration. The results, almost no one knew what they were actually working on. Now, here's where it gets really crazy. This top-secret project had a massive scientific problem. There wasn't one clear path to building a bomb. There were two, and both were unproven and incredibly difficult. The decision to go after both of them at the same time is what led directly to needing not just one, but multiple secret cities. It was a colossal gamble, a huge roll of the dice. Path number one was to isolate this super rare isotope, uranium-235. Path number two was even more wild, to create an entirely new element, plutonium, from scratch inside a nuclear reactor. Neither of these things had ever been done on an industrial scale, so going after both at once meant they had to build two completely different kinds of secret cities to support two completely different, unproven technologies. And this is where we meet the two main characters in our story. On one side, you have Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a massive, sprawling industrial city of 75,000 people, built for pure production. And on the other, you have Los Alamos, this tiny, isolated community of 6,000 brilliant minds in the New Mexico desert, built for pure science. You could say one was the project's brawn and the other was its brain. All right, so let's start with the brain, the high-altitude laboratory known as Site Y, or to the people who live there, just the hill. This was the intellectual nerve center of the entire project, and it was run by the brilliant and enigmatic physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer. I mean, seriously, look at this list. Oppenheimer put together a roster of scientific talent that was absolutely breathtaking. It was like the Avengers of physics. We're talking Nobel laureates, future Nobel laureates, all of them, stuck on a remote mesa together, trying to solve problems nobody had ever even thought of before. But here's the wild paradox of Los Alamos. Life there was primitive. Think muddy, unpaved streets, shoddy housing. And yet, inside these rustic buildings, you had these incredible minds enjoying this huge amount of intellectual freedom. Of course, all their mail was read by censors, and the entire town's only address was a P.O. box in Santa Fe. And their work led to two totally different bomb designs. The uranium bomb Little Boy was actually a pretty simple gun-type design. They were so confident it would work, they never even bothered to test it. But the plutonium bomb, Fat Man, well, that was a whole other beast. It needed a radical, totally unproven implosion device. It was a massive scientific longshot that consumed the lab. Okay, so for that sure thing uranium bomb to work, you needed a whole lot of enriched uranium. And for that, you needed the industrial muscle of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the brawn of the whole operation. A city built for one single purpose, production on a scale that is just hard to wrap your head around. Just let that number sink in. At its peak, 75,000 people lived and worked in Oak Ridge. In just a couple of years, it went from farmland to the fifth largest city in Tennessee. And here's the kicker. you couldn't find it on any map. It didn't exist. And the resources they needed, just staggering. To give you an idea, they needed so much copper for wiring that, because of wartime shortages, they had to borrow nearly 15,000 tons of silver from the US Treasury just to wind the magnets for the enrichment plants. They literally raided Fort Knox to build this thing. So how did they do it? Well, inside what was then the largest building on Earth, they used a process called gaseous diffusion. Basically, you turn uranium into a gas, and then you pump it through thousands and thousands of tiny filters. The lighter, useful atoms sneak through just a little bit faster than the heavier ones. It was an incredibly slow, painstaking process, separating atoms one by one. And this, right here, is the human face of compartmentalization. Thousands of young women who came to be known as the Calitron girls were hired to sit at these huge control panels. Their only job, for an entire 8-hour shift, was to watch a needle on a dial and turn knobs to keep it perfectly centered. That's it. They had no idea, none, that they were helping build the world's most powerful weapon. But we have to talk about a much darker side to this story. Oak Ridge was a segregated city, by design. While America was fighting a war for freedom overseas, the Army was building a community based on Jim Crow segregation right at home. African-American workers were only given manual labor jobs, they lived in crude shacks without plumbing, and they faced dehumanizing segregation in every single part of their lives. And so, after years of secret work, all the pieces were finally in place. The brainpower from Los Alamos and the industrial brawn from Oak Ridge all came together in the middle of the New Mexico desert. It was time to test that plutonium implosion device, to see if all this effort would end in success or failure. And then, in less than 1 month, the world changed forever. It started with a successful Trinity test in July. Just weeks later, the uranium bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, and then the plutonium bomb on Nagasaki. The secret was out. As he watched that first blinding flashlight light up the desert sky, Oppenheimer famously remembered a line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Those chilling words have become forever linked with the dawn of the atomic age and the terrible weight that its creators would carry forever. But the project's last secret was also its first cover-up. The official story the Army gave the press, an ammunition magazine had accidentally exploded. Even more disturbing, General Groves personally vetoed plans to evacuate nearby towns, knowingly exposing American civilians to radioactive fallout. These were the downwinders, and they paid a terrible, hidden price for all this secrecy. So the war ends, but what happens to these massive secret cities? Well, they don't just vanish, they transform, and they leave behind a complex, dual legacy that we are still grappling with today. You really have to look at it from two sides. On the one hand, you have incredible scientific progress. Los Alamos and Oak Ridge became world-class national laboratories, pushing forward everything from medicine to computing. But on the other hand, you have the immense costs, a massive environmental cleanup that's still going on, a dangerous precedent for government secrecy, and, of course, the beginning of the nuclear age and the Cold War. And really, that's what it all boils down to, isn't it? The story of these secret cities forces us to ask a really fundamental question. In the name of national security or scientific progress or any big goal, what secrets are worth their human, their moral, and their environmental cost? It's a question that was born in these secret cities, and it's one we are still wrestling with today.